Welcome to the Knowledge Seeker channel. The channel is dedicated to exploring critical issues in the world. As such, the channel is not afraid to challenge existing beliefs and practices in order to contribute to the advancement of knowledge. This presentation is titled, "Why do people vote against their interests during elections?" A discourse. The purpose of this presentation is to identify the reasons which prompt voters to tend to vote against their self-interest during elections. To accomplish the goal, Plato's knowledge of the forms, which categorizes people's level of knowledge, and Niccolò Machiavelli's characterization of behavior through the elites and masses model are used to identify and analyze why voters vote against their interests. For purpose of this presentation, the masses also include educated people who are short-sighted and are impulsive, as well as the less educated or the uneducated. Now, let's look at the strange behavior of why voters tend to vote for candidates that do not necessarily support them. A pattern has developed in various parts of the world showing that during elections, it is increasingly the case that a considerable number of people tend to vote against their self-interest. Due to the pattern, political analysts and observers wonder why people will knowingly vote for political candidates and political parties that openly say that they will take certain steps if they win. Indeed, when such candidates and political parties prevail, they eagerly carry out the plans and goals that they promised during the campaigns, to the consternation of the voters who voted for them. This strange behavior was particularly noted in the United States and Nigeria in recent elections. Thus, the question keeps popping up about why do people vote against their interests during elections. To answer this question, it might be necessary to pay a visit to Plato and Machiavelli, who attempted to explain people's level of knowledge and behavior. It is believed here that the writings of the two great intellectuals might provide the means to answer the question as to why people vote against themselves sometimes. This is Plato, the Greek philosopher and one of the most notable intellectuals in the history of the world. Now let's look at Plato's knowledge of the forms as it is written in his famous book, The Republic. Plato believes that the knowledge of the forms begins with the senses and ends in concepts independent of the senses. He breaks down people's level of knowledge into two on a vertical line. 1, mind and soul, and 2, matter and appearance. So look at the line. You see the vertical line, and then you have the like a cross. Then on top of the cross and below the cross. As indicated above, Plato divided people's knowledge level in a vertical line into two major categories, namely 1, the physical world of matter and appearance, and 2, the world of the mind and soul. Note, of the two worlds, the world of mind and soul is superior in intellect than the world of matter and appearance. So those who are categorized in the world of mind and soul are superior intellectually to those who are classified or who are grouped in the world of matter and appearance. The two worlds are subdivided to make it 4 categories of knowledge levels. So Plato take the two worlds and further break them into 4. So let's look at the divisions. Thus, the world of mind and soul is broken into A, the level of abstraction, B, the level of actualization. The world of physical and appearance is subdivided into A, the shadows of things, that is the cave dwellers, and B, the physical objects, those who have the ability to express beliefs and opinions. Again, look at, he took the two worlds and divided them into 4. At the top, you have the level of actualization, followed by level of abstraction. Then at the bottom, you have level of physical objects, and then level of shadow of things. One, cave dwellers. The cave dwellers who are at the bottom level are those people who only see the images and shadows of things. Their intelligence is so low that they do not think and only experience mere existence. Many of them cannot differentiate between fantasy and reality because of their low level of thinking. Then 2, at the second level of the physical world and matter are those individuals who can see objects and are capable of expressing beliefs and opinions. They are physical in their interactions, but really think deeply. They are impulsive and short-sighted. They spend recklessly and do things to impress without substance. Most people in the world can be classified under this category. In other words, if you look at the world over, pick any country in the world, most people come under this second category. 3, at the level of abstraction in the world of mind and soul are those who are capable of theorizing and dealing with abstract subjects like mathematics, logic, and science. Most highly educated individuals and professionals fall under this category. Thus, thinkers, writers, artists, scholars, architects, engineers, pastors, imams, lawyers, politicians, and so forth come under this category of knowledge. And then finally, 4, the fourth and the highest stage of cognition is the level of actualization. Only a few individuals are able to get to this stage of knowledge according to Plato. Thus, philosophers, geniuses, and those who have attained the highest levels of spirituality or consciousness that gets to this level. This is the level of true knowledge or reality. And it is the highest level of knowledge. And according to Plato, only very few people can get to this stage. People like Jesus Christ, maybe Buddha, Albert Einstein, and people of that sort. This is the picture or image of Niccolo Machiavelli, an Italian diplomat, writer, statesman. He wrote The Prince. Now let's look at Niccolo Machiavelli's concept of the elites and masses in his famous book, The Prince. In carefully studying human nature in a kind of psychoanalytic evaluation of human behavior, Machiavelli divided people into two categories, namely the elites and the masses. Having done so, he described the behavioral characteristics of both. He did so to educate and advise rulers about how to treat their subjects or citizens in his famous book, The Prince. Now, let's see how he describes the elites. According to him, the elites are 1. Superior. 2. They are calculating people. 3. They are those whose selfishness is national or rational and active. 4. The elites depend on themselves alone based on their ability. 5. They may use their reason to fully satisfy their passions. 6. They clearly choose their goals. 7. By depending on themselves, they express their freedom. In other words, an elite is somebody who plans using his own strength and weaknesses to plan instead of planning and then rely on somebody else to help you implement the plan. That is why he says the elites depends on themselves. 8. They are free of irrational restraints while in pursuit of their goals. 9. They are power driven. That means they are not afraid of power. They really want to grab power. 10. They maximize their rational self-interest by any means. 11. The end justifies the means. They do whatever it is necessary. 12. Anyone who wishes to be part of the elite must be a selfish power seeker. In other words, if you want to become rich, if you spend money lavishly, you cannot become rich. You have to be stingy to save in order to create businesses to be able to move forward to become rich. And 13. The person must be willing to use violence at any time. In other words, the elites are not afraid to use violence if necessary. And if you look at all over the world, you see how political rulers, sometimes they use violence, sometimes they don't, sometimes they persuade, sometimes they manipulate the population to do what they want them to do. Now, let's look at how Machiavelli describes the masses. Please pay attention. 1. The masses are vulgar and selfish. 2. They have irrational passions aimed at fulfilling short-term appetites. 3. They are simple and so ready to obey present necessities. In other words, they don't think long term. Everything they do is for the immediate gratification. They can easily be deceived. They are ever ready to enjoy bread and circuses. Bread here means food. And circuses means what? Entertainment, partying. So if a political leader can provide basic needs as well as provide a lot of entertainment to the population to confuse them, most of them will be satisfied. They fear power and envy the elite. 7. They mostly care about their physical security and their possessions. 8. They care about their personal prejudices and opinions. 9. The masses are short-sighted, weak, and irresponsible. In many parts of the world, you see the population, they complain, and they don't take the right actions to improve their conditions. And they always blame others. 10. They lack civic concern. 11. They are not able to rule themselves. 12. They are too stupid to use liberty well. That means that if you give them freedom, they don't even know how to manage the freedom. 13. They live in disorder if they do not have a despotic leader to rule over them. In fact, in many parts of the world, especially in the developing countries, the leaders think that they have to be strong, they have to be authoritarian in order to bring all the different ethnic groups, bring all the different sections of the country together with strong armed tactics. This is also common in Africa. And 14, as far as they are provided for, they care less about what the government is doing. In other words, most of the masses, as far as the government gives them just a little, that is enough for them to be able to get food for themselves and their wives and their husbands and their children, provide housing for them, and they are satisfied. They don't care about what the government is doing. And that's why in many parts of the world, the politicians are able to embezzle massively without much consequence, because most citizens don't really pay much attention. Now, Machiavelli went further to look at the nature of the state. So let's look at the nature of the state. What happens on how the government and the government leaders operate based on the nature of the citizens. 1. According to Machiavelli, the presence and extent of government's tyranny depends on the balance between the elites and the masses. 2. Whenever the masses dominate and the elites are few, the ruler is likely to rule tyrannically. What that means is that in any country in the world, if you have fewer educated people, the political leaders are more likely to be authoritarian, because the leader knows that most of the citizens don't know their rights, and the leader will suppress them, change the constitution, does whatever he or she wants, because most of the citizens are not politically aware. 3. When the elites constitute the majority, tyranny is absent or minimized. Here, it means that if most of the population in any country are well educated and they know their rights, then it becomes very difficult for the leader to rule dictatorially, because most of the citizens are aware and they will fight back, or they will take the necessary actions to stop the leaders from being tyrannical. 4. Tyrants can easily rule the masses by providing a minimum level of stability. Here, it means that in a country where most of the citizens are less educated and unaware, all what the leaders need to do, just provide the citizens a minimum level of comfort like food, housing, and most of the people will be satisfied with their lives. So now let's compare Plato and Machiavelli's views of people. So we are comparing the two scholars on how they look at people's level of knowledge and behavior. 1. Both Plato and Machiavelli divide human intellectual capability or level of knowledge and behavior into two. A. Plato's wall of physical and appearance, which he subdivides into the cave dwellers as physical object, is equivalent to Machiavelli's masses. In other words, if you look at Plato's bottom part of his vertical line, that line compares with Machiavelli's masses. This group includes the lower and middle classes who toil daily to scratch a living. Most voters are in this category. People in this category rarely read, do not generally care about what is going on in society as far as they can take care of themselves. Many are not interested in civic affairs, and some are not even interested in politics at all. B. Plato's level of abstraction and actualization is comparable to Machiavelli's elites. So if you look at Plato's higher sections, compares very well with Machiavelli's description of the elites. Why? Because they are the most educated, quite knowledgeable, and pay greater attention to what is going on in society. They think critically and analytically. They produce most leaders, policy makers, decision makers, thinkers, scientists, philosophers, innovators, wealth creators, presidents, prime ministers, governors, administrators, and so forth. So the elite and those at the abstract and actualization level produce the most elites in the world. They are the opinion molders and societal influencers. Politicians pay attention to them because they cause change to take place. So politicians will always pay attention to the elites better than to the masses. See, generally, there are more people at the masses or physical and appearance level than at the elite level. Translated, in every country in the world, most citizens are found at the lower and middle classes, while fewer people are at the level of abstraction and actualization, or the elites. Please don't be confused. I'm using the words that Plato and Machiavelli use to be able to describe what is going on here. This means that in every country in the world, a few individuals, that is the elite, rule over the majority. Think about it, guys. Why is it that in every country in the world, whether you talk about China, you talk about Democratic Republic of the Congo, you talk about Morocco, you talk about the US, you talk about Mexico, you talk about Brazil, it is always few people at the top that rules over the majority of the people. You see? One reason is that the few individuals also own most of the wealth, control and influence the government, owns the media, and are responsible for dictating public policy and the direction of society. In other words, in every country, it is the elites that controls or owns most of the wealth. And they are the ones who influence the government the most. And they are the ones who own the media. And they influence public policy, not the masses at the lower levels. Now, let's look at factors that influence voting behavior. So please pay attention to the factors that influences voting behavior. Political scientists and psychologists have identified factors that are likely to encourage people to vote or not vote. There are 1. Education. Highly educated individuals are more likely to vote during elections than the less educated. Translated, those under Plato's categories of abstraction and actualization, which matches Machiavelli's elites, are more likely to vote than those in Plato's categories of cave dwellers and physical objects, or Machiavelli's masses. 2. Income. Those with higher income are more likely to vote during elections than those with lesser income. This ties in with education, leading to being more interested in politics and public affairs generally. 3. Age. Older adults are more likely to participate in elections by voting extensively than younger adults. Here, younger adults could be placed in Plato's category of cave dwellers and physical objects, and Machiavelli's the masses. Why? Because younger adults, some of them just finished school, some of them have not gotten jobs, some of them just gotten jobs, some of them have not gotten any savings, so they are just struggling to live their lives. Hence, they pay less attention to political issues, except if the situation becomes very critical before they mobilize themselves to go vote in large numbers. 4. Interest in politics. Those who are interested in politics are more likely to vote during elections than those who are not. They could be aroused to develop interest due to education, social class, family influence, and or community motivation. 5. Race and ethnicity. Globally, people could be motivated by race or ethnicity to become actively involved in politics. In the US, for example, whites are more likely to vote than blacks and other minority groups. In Nigeria, members of any groups whose sons and daughters are running for elective office are more likely to vote than members of any group whose members are not actively seeking elective office. Now, let's look at patterns in voting choices. This relates to the previous presentation. 1. Partisan identification. Those who identify strongly with the political parties are more likely to vote in large numbers than those who do not identify with the political parties. This takes place in almost every country in the world. In particular, the members of the ruling political parties and those of the major opposition parties who are trying to defeat the ruling parties are more likely to vote in a greater number than non-party members of the public. 2. Gender. Generally, men are more likely to vote in a greater number during elections than women in many countries of the world. 3. Ideology. Those who are ideologically committed to certain principles are more likely to vote than those with no ideology. And there are many examples or instances to cite from. A. Liberals are more likely to vote for issues involving social welfare, education, healthcare, employment, tax increases, and government programs. B. Conservatives are more likely to vote for issues dealing with traditional family values, less government, low taxes, and religion. 4. Single issues. Some citizens are motivated to vote due to being attached or committed to single issues that are in the ballot. 5. Salience. People are motivated to vote for issues which they identify strongly with. Salience is a major factor that contributes to the strange ways voters choose to vote for certain political parties and candidates. Now, where does the politicians fit in with the Platonian and Machiavellian models? Politicians all over the world are birds of the same identical plumage. They behave similarly since their primary goal is to win elections and get into political power. Thus, politicians fall under Plato's mind and soul category of the level of knowledge. In particular, they occupy the level of abstraction in Plato's categorization. On the other hand, they fall under the category of the elite in Machiavelli's model of knowledge and human behavior. Why? Because they are capable of expressing beliefs, opinions, conceptualize in abstract ways, and apply critical thinking. Additionally, most of them are educated and many have acquired vast practical experiences in dealing with people. Moreover, as Machiavelli indicated, A, they are calculating. B, they are power-driven and deceptive. C, they maximize their rational self-interest by any means. D, most of them believe that the end justifies the means. That means they do whatever it is necessary for them to win an election and be in power. In some countries, they rig the elections. In some countries, they buy votes. E, they are selfish power seekers. Basically, they know what they want and they go get it. And F, they are willing to lie, manipulate, and use violence if necessary. To win elections, politicians hire tacticians, image makers, opinion poll experts, communication specialists, door-to-door campaigners, lawyers, and psychologists to assist them in developing campaign goals and strategies to communicate information about their goals to different targeted voting publics. Thus, politicians are able to produce different messages for different audiences based on the socio-economic and educational levels of the targeted voters. In other words, when they go to an environment where you have mostly the lower classes, they are going to target their communication or their information in such a way to make it for people at that level to understand what they are doing. When they go to the upper middle classes, they will tailor their information in such a way to attract those at that level. And then when they go to the upper class, they come up with a different communication strategy. Thus, they make different promises to different groups in a simultaneous manner and hope to convince or confuse the people with catchy phrases, slogans, and powerful words. During election season, voters are bombarded with extensive information as politicians scramble to gain support and recognition in the hope of winning elections. Due to too much information, a majority of voters are confused about the messages and promises being made. Therefore, many pay attention to only the catchy words or phrases or slogans. Some voters only pay attention to the items that affect or attract or are important to them and ignore other issues. Now, let's see why people vote against their self-interest. So here we are going to go step by step because I'm identifying all the reasons why people tend to vote against their interests. Here you have voters in Kenya lining up to go vote in an election. You have the same thing here in India. You remember, India is the most populated country in the world. Before it used to be China, today it is India. 1. Most voters fall under Plato's physical orientation and Machiavelli's masses. A majority of the voters in any country in the world fall under the category of Plato's cave dwellers and the physically oriented, and Machiavelli's masses, who barely think for themselves or think in a very shallow manner. Machiavelli noted that the masses are A. Vulgar and selfish, B. Have irrational passions aimed at fulfilling short-term appetites, C. They are simple and so ready to obey present necessities, D. They can easily be deceived, and E. They are ever ready to enjoy bread and circuses. Again, these 5 items are taken from the original masses that was stated earlier in the presentation. 2. Most voters are overwhelmed by the volume of information during election time. Due to being bombarded with too much information during election season, many voters are influenced by catchy words, slogans, and phrases that do not mean anything. Politicians sometimes purposely confuse voters with meaningless but attractive and catchy words to vote for them. So here you have voters who are carried away by the slogans that they don't even pay attention to what the politicians plan to do. 3. Most middle and lower class voters are only interested in bread and butter issues, that is, food issues. Most members of the lower middle classes are only interested in bread and butter and personal security issues. So, the politicians promise them a lot about how they are going to create social welfare, employment, and ensure their personal security. Thus, voters allow themselves to be deceived with false promises. Plato and Machiavelli had noted that the cave dwellers and those who see physical objects and or the masses are easily deceived because they are only interested in short-term passions, including bread and butter, and their personal security. 4. Most voters seem to prefer strong men and women to rule them. Most voters are weak and prefer strong men and women to rule them. This is why in most countries, politicians who act tough, almost arrogant, speak boldly, promise heaven and earth, and damn the consequences often win elections than those who speak softly, look humble, pay attention to human rights and the democratic process. Why? Because both Plato and Machiavelli noted that the cave dwellers, and those who think and act physically, that is, the masses, can barely think for themselves, are not resolute, hence need leaders who act like strong men and women to assure them of their security, employment, and food. For instance, in Nigeria, while President Goodluck Jonathan, a soft-spoken, humble, and down-to-earth individual, was in power, many Nigerians verbally abused him for being weak and clueless, despite that he worked hard to unite the country, improve the economy, create employment, and raise the standard of living. The politicians in the opposition parties, some members of the intelligentsia, and sections of the public abused him regularly. They wanted an individual with a strong man personality to rule them. They got their wish when a messianic individual became president. Major General Muhammadu Buhari retired. The Messiah came, devastated the economy, trampled on democratic and human rights, ignored the rule of law, and tribalized the federal government of Nigeria. Nigerians who fervently criticized President Jonathan kept quiet while Buhari was in power. Perhaps they were afraid of him. And Buhari ruled for 8 years. This is President Goodluck Jonathan on the left and President Muhammadu Buhari on the right. Nazi Germany provides a classic case of a highly educated and advanced technological society which allowed a less educated individual with a strong man personality to promise heaven and earth, and succeeded in winning elections to establish an authoritarian society in the 1930s. It could be said that due to difficulties that the Germans encountered after the First World War, a large percentage of the citizens fell for the rosy promises Adolf Hitler made during his campaigns, and eventually led the Germans to fight a grueling Second World War. And today, a lot of people sit back and reflect on how they allowed Adolf Hitler to rise up and become so powerful in a country that claimed to be highly sophisticated. It could even be said that the need for a strong man leader is responsible for why many women often vote against female political candidates during elections. That is why in almost every country in the world, the national and regional parliaments, congresses, and assemblies are dominated by men. In countries like the US and France, a woman has not succeeded in becoming a president. It should be noted that women have ruled Germany and Britain. Thus, most elected political leaders in the world have a strong man personality characteristics. They are not afraid to lie, manipulate, threaten if necessary, and promise the impossible. 5. Voters tend to prefer politicians who speak boldly and take risks. It is individuals with strong man, strong woman personality who are not afraid to take risks that win most elections, whether they are men or women. The reason is that the masses are afraid of power and want someone to take care of them like a parent taking care of a child. Therefore, the bolder a political candidate is, the higher the chance that he or she might win an election. The boldness demonstrates confidence that most voters seek for their leaders. Hence, Chief Bola Ahmed Tinubu told Nigerians boldly that it was his turn to become the president. Today, he is the president. 6. Most voters want politicians who entertain them during campaigns. Both Plato and Machiavelli noticed that the cave dwellers and those who operate at the physical levels of knowledge and behavior fall under the category of the masses. Machiavelli noted that they are ever ready to enjoy bread and circuses. This means that providing basic necessities and entertaining them through diversionary things like sports, music, festivals are sufficient to keep most of the masses happy. Thus, many voters pay attention to the theatrics rather than focusing on the issues that are likely to affect their lives. This is why politicians who dramatize and promise the impossible are likely to prevail than serious politicians who speak dryly about the issues. 7. The failure by majority of the voters to analyze issues critically. The unwillingness or failure on the part of many voters to engage in serious analysis of the character and records of politicians running for elective offices often lead to their voting for the wrong choices during elections. Most voters in most countries come from the lower and middle classes, that is, the masses, who rarely spend time to read and analyze the character, qualifications, and experiences of political candidates. Hence, they often end up voting for those who are eloquent and dramatic but deceptive. 8. Most voters are confused when politicians make many promises. Indeed, most voters are confused about the issues because political candidates make different promises to different voting groups. Thus, instead of taking their civic duty seriously, many voters tend to identify with only one or two issues and ignore other issues and items that the candidates have promised to institute if they win. And there are many instances to cite from. A. Hence, voters who strongly identify with race are most likely to vote for a candidate who speaks for the chosen race and ignore other items on the candidate's agenda. Thus, in the US, Asians and Latin Americans who prefer to identify with the white race tend to vote for the Republican Party candidates. Even though the Democratic Party candidates are more likely to deal with issues that affect their ethnicities more favorably. Since race is the most important concern, they tend to view the Democratic Party as representing blacks and other non-white groups. So they go and vote Republican. B. Voters who identify with ethnicity are most likely to vote for candidates who stand on the same ground with them on ethnicity. In most parts of Africa, voters tend to vote on the ethnicity of the candidates running for office and not necessarily on the agenda of the candidates. C. Those who are motivated by religion are most likely to vote for candidates that represent their religious points of view. This is common in the Middle East, Africa, some part of Asia, and Latin America. This is a shot of Latino voters, see, in the USA. In other words, they voted against their interests, and many of them are being deported back to their home countries. 9. Voting based on ideological reasons. Many voters are motivated to vote for a political candidate due to their ideological orientation. Quite often, they ignore other items on the candidate's agenda and focus only on the ideological issue. If the candidate wins the election and begins to implement other items on his or her agenda, those who voted for him or her feel disappointed because he or she is not concentrating on the ideological issue alone. This is why sometimes voters will vote and end up with a different outcome, because the politician, after winning an election, has to accomplish many tasks that he or she promised during the campaigns to the different groups. 10. Voting for courts without thinking about the consequences. Voting without thinking about the consequences of asking for courts in government sites and programs. Perhaps because most voters behave like masses, they generally do not think critically when they demand cuts in government size and government programs. So when the politicians start to cut programs that affect them, they become agitated and angry and start criticizing the government for not caring about them. The problem plays out in every democratic country in the world. The voters always think that the cuts will not affect them in person, but will only affect other people. Today you have American farmers who are now, some of them are struggling because of the tariff wars that are going on between the US and other countries. So this is a picture of a large farm in the USA, just to reinforce how the farmers are feeling as the tariff war goes on. 11. Voting for cuts that benefit others. In almost every democratic country, when most voters vote for cuts in government sites and programs, they always expect the cuts to take place in programs that benefit other people. They do so thinking that they are entitled to the government programs that benefit them, while castigating programs that benefit others. However, when the cuts begin to affect their own government benefits, they are flabbergasted and do not understand why the government should cut their own programs. They do so because they only think about themselves and not the society at large. 12. Voters decry corruption and yet support corruption. How does that work? As stated earlier, voters rarely consider the implications of the positions they take to vote on various issues. Hence, most voters in the world hate corruptible practices by public officials and want the government to fight corruption uncompromisingly. However, when a charge of corruption is made against a public official that they support, they demonstrate in support of the corrupt official and accuse the government of political witch hunting. Thus, they support fighting corruption against the others and not those they support. This is why it is very tricky to fight corruption anywhere in the world. In other words, fight corruption only when it affects office holders that are not in their camp. On the other hand, corrupt officials in their camp should be protected because they are in their camp. So that also creates a problem, and the politicians understand this. That is why sometimes politicians will promise to fight corruption, but they don't do anything about it because they know that the voters are not decisive about the issue. Although they talk about it, they scream about corruption, but they are always taking sides. 13. Most politicians are power-driven. It appears that most politicians in the world fall under Plato's abstraction level of knowledge and Machiavelli's elite category. According to Machiavelli, the elites are self-centered, power-driven, and strives to maximize self-interest by doing whatever is necessary to prevail. As politicians, they make different promises to different voting groups, use slogans and catchy words to attract and confuse the voters to vote for them. Thus, many voters are easily carried away to vote for candidates they are not even sure will deliver on their promises. This is why sometimes the voters vote against their interest. This is just a categorization of the different kinds of elites. You have the economic elite, social elite, cultural elite, political elite, ruling power. So they are the rulers, or those who have the ability to rule. They dominate every country, every society in the world. Conclusion. As noted by Plato and Machiavelli, a large percentage of voters in the world act like cave dwellers and the masses because they do not think for themselves, are short-sighted, easily influenced by rosy promises, catchy slogans, and phrases that do not amount to anything meaningful. Hence, in every part of the world, many voters vote against their self-interest because they only identify with one issue without considering all the issues and the consequences. On the other hand, the politicians always prevail because they are power-driven, have goals, and do whatever it is necessary to prevail. The politicians are very calculating and are aware that most voters can easily be manipulated and enticed to vote even against their own interest. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Please subscribe to the channel and listen to other interesting presentations. Once again, thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Have a great day.